Chapter 15. So this is how a war starts, thought Gregor. Not with two armies facing off, waiting for the signal to charge. Not with a wave of rats invading the avenues of regalia. Not with a formation of bats swooping down on an unsuspecting colony of rats. It begins much more quietly. In a room, on a field, in a remote tunnel, when someone who has power decides the time has come. No, he said. We have to find some way to stop it. It is too late, said Lexa. It is ironic. I could never start a war in regalia. I can barely get leave to go on a picnic. But here, away from my city, I am free to make momentous decisions. Then maybe they should have kept you locked up in your city if you're going to go around declaring war, said Gregor. Did you not see the bodies? Exclaimed Lexa. What would you have me do, Gregor? Sit by while my friends are driven to their death? We do not know exactly what plans the Nars have for the Nibbler's cousin, said Howard, but we do know they have a history of moving them from place to place. Perhaps the majority of the Nibblers have already reached their new home in safety. That they were forced from their old home is not acceptable, said Lexa. That hundreds lie dead from the journey is not acceptable. Okay, but maybe you might want to consider some other options besides waging war, said Gregor. As in? Said Lexa. I don't have any off the top of my head, said Gregor, but I bet I can come up with something a little less extreme. Well, when you do, I would love to hear it, said Lexa. I am sure it will dazzle us all. She was mocking him. He might as well have been talking to Rip Red. Gregor stared at her a moment. It was pretty easy, starting a war, he said. It was not difficult, said Lexa. I wonder what it will take to get out of it, said Gregor. I doubt you will ever find out, since you are going home, said Lexa. We, on the other hand, must stay and live here. They did not take a watch together that night. Gregor didn't want to argue with Lexa. What he wanted was to think up an answer to her question that would dazzle everyone. The problem was, he didn't know what else could be done about the rats abusing the Nibblers. If they didn't use force, how could the humans stop them? He knew the rats would not listen to talk. Since the plague, the humans had given the rats a lot of food and medicine to make up for unleashing the disease, but it had not erased the bitterness. It was even more complicated because the rats did not have a leader to negotiate with. After King Gorger had died, the rats had splintered into groups. The plague had thrown them into even greater chaos. Now there was the Bane. He might be the next king. But then what about the rats that didn't follow him, like Ripred and his gang? What about rats like Lapblood, who had been with Gregor on the quest to find the cure to the plague? She'd been trying to keep her pups alive. That's the main thing he knew about her. Would she support the Bane? If he was alive? If Ripred hadn't killed him? Who exactly was Lexa declaring war on? The rats who had driven the Nibblers off the cliff? Anyone who supported the Bane? Or just every rat, regardless of what they stood or thought? Whatever Lexa had in mind, Gregor guessed that if a war really did begin, no one was going to take the time to interview a rat on its political position before they killed it. Gregor found himself wishing very badly that he could talk to Hazard's father, Hamnet. Of course, Hamnet was gone, killed months ago by the ants in a battle back in the jungle. 10 years earlier, Hamnet had been one of Regalia's top soldiers. During a battle, he had inadvertently caused a dam to break, which resulted in the drowning deaths of not only an army of rats, but also humans, bats, and the innocent rat pups sheltering in nearby caves. Hamnet had gone temporarily mad and then disappeared. Many years later, he had resurfaced in the jungle with his little son Hazard to act as Gregor's guide. Gregor remembered Vicus, who was Hamnet's father, begging him to return to Regalia. What do you do here that you could not do there? To which Hamnet had replied, I do no harm. I do no more harm. Hamnet knew if he returned to Regalia, they would make him fight again. Hamnet had tried to explain his position on war to Lexa, how it did no good, how innocent creatures died, and in the end, how it only increased the already intense hatred between the rats and the humans. Hamnet believed that the least amount of violence used, the better. The things he'd talked about had made real sense to Gregor. Then an army of ants had appeared to destroy their precious plague cure, and they had all ended up fighting anyway. And that's when Hamnet had died. But what he had said, everything he had said, had been right. Deep inside, Gregor was sure of this. Only he did not know how to work his ideas into some kind of argument with Luxa. Not here. Not with the dead mice and the bane running loose and everything. And why would she listen to him anyway? Why would she listen to him say violence was a bad choice when he had hacked up a couple hundred snakes with a smile on his face? He drifted off to sleep feeling heartsick and confused, and without one dazzling idea. When he awoke the next morning, the bats had been fishing already. Photo's Glow and Zap were making loud smacking noises as they wolfed down their breakfast. Along with the fish, Howard had given them some other picnic treats that had spoiled. Mushrooms and cream sauce, rotted greens. The bats and Temp were only eating from the river now, but the remaining picnic food was running low. There were a few loaves of stale bread, some cheese, some dried vegetables, and a couple of cakes. Gregor looked over the supplies and thought about Boots wailing for food and water in the jungle. It had been unbearable. He sighed and picked up a raw fish, hacking off a piece with his sword. Better to save the picnic food for the kids. Howard must have made a similar decision because he was cracking open shellfish with a rock. "Try this," he said to Gregor, handing him a slimy thing on a half shell. "It is considered a delicacy at the fount." Gregor dumped the contents of the shell into his mouth. His teeth chased the slippery glob around his mouth for a few chews, then he swallowed. "Ugh." "I can see why," he said, trying to be polite, because he didn't like it. "There are plenty," said Howard, shoving a stack toward Gregor. "He does not want them, Howard. They are disgusting," said Luxa. She was expertly flaying the skin off a fish. Gregor agreed with Luxa, but because he was angry with her and he liked Howard, he ate a few more of the shellfish just to prove him wrong. He drank some water to wash the taste out of his mouth, but then he could feel the things sloshing around in his stomach. Cartizan awoke and seemed to have gained a little of his strength back. He was woozy from the medicine. "Where are the others?" he kept asking. "We are going to get them now," said Luxa gently, but he kept repeating, Where? Where are the others?" Howard got Cartizan to eat some ground-up fish and gave him another dose of painkiller. Soon the mouse was sleeping again. "I'm afraid I shall have to sedate him on the entire journey back to Regalia," said Howard. Space on the bats was becoming an issue. Hazard was still supposed to be lying down, so he and Luxa filled up Aurora's back. Gregor had Boots and Temp with him on Eris, and Howard settled Cartizan on Nike's back. "We are becoming a flying hospital ward," said Howard. "What with Hazard and Cartizan, we are lucky no one else is hurt." Boots held up her finger indignantly. The nick was all but invisible now. "Me?" she said, shocked that she'd been overlooked. "Oh my goodness. Did I forget you, Boots? We had better put some medicine on that," said Howard. It did not take more than an hour to cover the stretch of Hades Hall that was flat. Then the tunnel began to tilt upward as rapidly as it had dipped. If the trip down had required patient navigation from the bats, they had been allowed to coast for much of it. Now that they were flying upward, it required real physical exertion, but they seemed to be moving faster. Thalia began to fall behind as the morning wore on. By lunch, it was clear the little bat was done in.